headed for a crisis. Yes, we're headed towards a hiatus, can I call it that, in the situation. But what they don't understand is that it is the end of one era and the opening of another. It isn't the end of life on Earth. It is not going to be the end of the human race on this planet.
Well,
These are all. This
agree
is
with that.
this is so the conflation of certain misinterpreted spiritual traditions, whether it's from the Book of Revelations or elsewhere, or the Mayan calendar in 2012, has created this sort of eschatological juggernaut,
Sure.
which is very Scientological. It's very majestic, and it has a lot of underpinnings within the philosophy of why the secrecy has continued on like it is. This is one major axis of why the secrecy has continued. The other one is the technological and money and control and macroeconomic control of the planet.
Yeah.
My point to people is that, for example, now I've been doing this for 19 years, and I've had, if you brief the CIA director, you've had some good access, and that was
Sure.
16 years ago. And my family put the first man on the moon. So I have had access to people within classified projects for a lot of my life. And for example, and I know that we're going to probably disagree on this because I saw what you wrote on your blog after my talk last night. There are people who have been exposed to what they wanted them to see. This Bob Lazar was one that they then allow to speak out. Now the question is, what's the agenda behind that allowing? I have had more than a dozen people who have worked in facilities in Dulce and in Pine Gap in Australia, and other places where they have actually been growing the gray and reptilian species that people think are ETs. And that the people who've been in the projects think they're working alongside an alien. And they're not. They're absolutely what are called nanobiomachines. And they are programmed life forms. And there is no question that that is going on. And so the larger question becomes, if someone comes up to you with just an empirical observation, what is it they're seeing? Now I'm going to cross over into something even more controversial. We have some people at Lockheed and another program, I can't say where it is, but it's in the South, in an underground facility, and the chief scientist is someone I know very well. And they have developed electromagnetic systems where they can put someone into a state and they can go into, and this gets into a cosmological complex discussion now, a lower astral or denser astral field. And some would call this demonic. And they can actually see beings and creatures there and bring them in three-dimensional and materialize in flesh and blood through these electronics. So a lot of these things that people are seeing have nothing to do with interstellar and extraterrestrial. So when I talk about the interstellar civilizations that also have trans-dimensional capability. You can't go through interstellar space at the speed of light or less.
Right.
But there's a cosmological indigestion happening within ufology and disclosure that I find disturbing, because people are conflating interdimensional with extraterrestrial with PLFs that are programmed life forms, man-made, and all of this is being put together as if it is one thing, and it isn't. It's unfortunately much more complex than this, and this is exactly why.
I agree with that as well. It's very complex.
This is why when Martin Cannon, back in the late 80s, put together a 2,000 footnoted paper and collection proving the military human involvement with abductions, and that the creatures they were using were not ET. There wasn't some alliance between Majestic and these ETs. The ETs wouldn't bother with them. Now, I say they're aliens, but they're not extraterrestrials. Okay, and now we're getting into, and people say I'm being cheeky. I'm not, because these are very bizarre creatures. And some of them, even, I'm going to take it one step further. You've all heard of Roswell. And you've all heard of that there have been a number of electromagnetic weapon systems that have targeted and knocked down interstellar vehicles, not at a great kill rate in the early days. I hate to use the word kill rate, it's terrible, but it's become more and more efficient since SDI and since the 90s, frankly, and particularly in the last 5 or 10 years. What happened, however, in the early days, they had enough crude stuff. Of course, we had things like the Philadelphia experiment, which did not happen in Philadelphia. It happened in Rhode Island. That was the cover story. That's another whole discussion. But that was in the 40s. And so there were very advanced electronics that were already being used. And by the time the extraterrestrials showed up and we were detonating nuclear weapons, we were able, at Roswell, at our only nuclear bomb squadron, to have one of these weapons in a radar dome or configuration that caused the two of those to crash.
Right.
There were bodies on that. Some of them were living. And I have a witness who actually handled one of the living ones as late as 1950, 51, here in Virginia, not far from where I live, at Camp Perry, Pearry, very top secret facility. Now, what's interesting is that genetic material from some of those bodies have subsequently been cloned from a number of different species. Now, you know, I have a daughter with a PhD in neuroscience and genetics from the most prestigious university in the world. And what I've done is I've looked at this sort of what the current state of the art of science is in the non-classified world, is that if they wish to, they could take cells from a human and clone them. Absolutely.
Sure.
Yes.
Now,
We
imagine what has
that.
existed within the classified world, because these are the people who were these were the humans who were the spiritual descendants of Mengele and the Nazis, and Werner von Braun, and that whole
You're talking
set.
about the scientists.
The scientists who were brought into these classified projects and who were at the foundation of the CIA and the early space program. And so the highly compartmented programs that deal with this issue have, and this is the thing, everyone talks about the anti-gravity and this and that. What they forget are the enormous advances that have happened between the early 40s and now in genetics and bioengineering and neuroscience.
Well,
and those have gone into application where they now have created these creatures that people think, oh, that's an extraterrestrial. I say, it is not an extraterrestrial. So the whole thing is deliberately become confused so that people will make an assessment that there are the good aliens and the bad aliens. And if we step into that cowboys and Indian mindset, they can then divide the human race into another war footing that will fulfill the majestic plan that was hatched in the 50s, that will take us, as Douglas MacArthur said in his last address to the Congress, to interplanetary war, and which is the World War III they want. So most of retail ufology, I would say 90+% of it, has embedded within it this message and this information and these images for the purpose of majestic. Now, I think people do it completely innocently. Because
I want to ask a direct question here, because this is personal, and I haven't said this on camera before, so here we go. I'm an abductee, and I'm a mountaineer, and I was abducted out of my tent in December 1981 in the Himalayas on the slopes of Makalu, which is in Nepal, on the border of Tibet. And that wasn't done by the military. This was done in December, in winter in the Himalayas, and I was taken out of my tent, floated over the glacier in the middle of the night, and it was minus 40 degrees. This wasn't the military who were doing that. They couldn't do that.
Well, I'm not saying all contact has been military. I'm being very specific. I'm saying that there's enough. Let's look. If you have a nugget of gold and you dump a whole bunch of fool's gold on it, then no one's doing an assay. And the question becomes, what part of it is extraterrestrial? What part of it is interdimensional?
Exactly.
What part of it is man-made? And what part of it is some mixed up where people... And here, I'll make it a little more complicated. There are people who've had ET contact. And when these classified projects find out about it, they will then target them for an abduction so that their paradigm and their perception of this will become confused.
Okay, but I think what happens here is that we are aware of this level that you're talking about. We're aware of all these different dimensions because we basically dimensions of this argument because we have been exposed to these levels by different secret witnesses, okay? And I think if we have a disagreement, what it is I don't know if it's completely, it's not an either or question. It's a how much. It's a percentage, as you say. It's going to be is there sometime abductions that are ET related, that are real ET related, okay, and handled by a certain group of ETs? Is there a MyLab element to it, and is that maybe the largest portion? Highly probable, okay, but is it exclusively that there are only good ETs? I think that when you extrapolate that, that's where I have a problem, because
I think the problem is
that's
with the
philosophically
of the,
a problem,
the
a limited way of looking at reality.
No, I think the problem is a Manichaean view that has to divide entire species into good and bad. This is precisely what Hitler did when he would say, the Jews are bad and they're dirty and they're this. I think we have to be extremely careful.
Well, I don't think it's necessary to do that quite so much as it is in terms of the overall. I mean, we're talking universes. Okay, we're talking multiple species out there that go, beyond this solar system, certainly, and we're talking about life in general.
But the point is,
I don't think that we can sit here and make a statement like what I heard you say on stage yesterday, which was there are no bad ETs.
No, I think you can say that there is no evidence that the planet has been invaded by hostile, is the word I used, civilizations
so far
that have an intent.
That you have not, in other words,
you can't prove a negative. This is axiomatic.
Well,
what I can
so
say,
we have a problem.
You can't prove a negative.
In other words, that's the point.
But that's the point. You can't prove a negative, but what you can do is go with the evidence that you do have. And one of the sets of evidence we have for CSETI, which has gone around the world and made contact all over the world with thousands of people, we have never had a harmful event happen. We have never had anything resembling anything that has frightened or harmed anyone on the contact team. Yep. On the other hand, we have had members of our team that have been targeted with these psychotronic-related military-type abduction events, including myself.
Right,
and so what I have to go with is the evidence that I have, and I also know that there is the stagecraft, to use an Institute for Strategic Studies document that I have, that talks about the stagecraft of abductions because of its psychological warfare value to the agenda of an us versus them Manichaean worldview that would redound to the benefit of the military-industrial complex. So this is very circular. And I think that what I'm saying is one has to be very careful if you're going to be involved with disclosure and contact and saying this group is bad, this group is good, we're good and we're bad, and we're slipping right back into the Israelis versus the Palestinians, the Jews versus the Christians, the Muslims versus the whatever.
But this is not where we're going.
But if you say that there are bad aliens that are working with a secret government.
The language is actually service to others versus service to self, and that in itself is also a matter of degree.
But you
so
can't
it's not
make that
really
judgment.
good.
See, here's the problem.
Well, none of us can. That's the whole point.
Well, that's my whole point. And I think before one starts going down the path of the sky is falling, and we start unleashing this Manichaean worldview of here are the ones that are service to others and here's the ones that are selfish, I would say that there's some enlightened self-interest everywhere. And let's back this up just a little further. Let's say that these civilizations...
Especially by the invaders.
By the who?
If there's an invasion race, then enlightened self-interest is going to be the predominant model by which they're going to operate, right?
And you're entitled to that. I'm positing.
All I'm doing here, look, until it actually happens in black and white.
Who has been invaded? And
there is evidence. In other words, you can get evidence on both sides of the question.
Well, but to characterize it as an invasion, what if there is an interstellar group that have different ones of them have different functions? For example, I'm going to take this a little further. There's one group that has a very specific function you might call this the Noah's Ark function. That this planet is under tremendous environmental stress. We're losing thousands of species and plants and animals.
Yep.
I've spoken with people about the landing in Provence of this ET craft in a lavender field, and there were these little ETs out picking lavender, and it